The European Parliament is the directly elected parliamentary institution of the European Union, together with the Council of the European Union and a European Commission. It exercises the legislative function of the EU. The Parliament is composed of 751 members, who represent the second largest democratic electorate in the world and the largest transnational democratic electorate in the world. It has been directly elected every 5 years by universal suffrage since 1979. However, voter turnout at European Parliament elections has fallen consecutively at each election since the date, and has been under 50% since 1999. Voter turnout in 2014 stood at 42.54% of all European voters. Although the European Parliament has legislative power that the Council and Commission do not possess, it does not formally possess legislative initiative, as most national parliaments of European Union member states do. The Parliament is the first institution of the EU, and shares equal legislative and budgetary powers with the Council. It likewise has equal control over the EU budget. Finally, the European Commission, the executive body of the EU, is accountable to Parliament. In particular, Parliament elects the President of the Commission, and approves the appointment of the Commission as a whole. It can subsequently force the Commission as a body to resign by adopting a motion of censure. The President of the European Parliament is Martin Schulz, elected in January 2012. He presides over a multi-party chamber, the two largest groups being the group of the European People's Party and the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. The last union-wide elections were the 2014 elections. The European Parliament has 3 places of work: Brussels, the City of Luxembourg, and Strasbourg. Luxembourg is home to the administrative offices. Meetings of the whole Parliament take place in Strasbourg and in Brussels. Committee meetings are held in Brussels. History. The Parliament, like the other institutions, was not designed in its current form when it first met on the 10th of September 1952. One of the oldest common institutions. It began as the Common Assembly of the European Coal and Steel Community. It was a consultative assembly of 78 appointed parliamentarians drawn from the national parliaments of member states, having no legislative powers. The change since its foundation was highlighted by Professor David Farrell of the University of Manchester. For much of its life, the European Parliament could have been justly labeled a multilingual talking shop. Its development since its foundation is a testament to the evolution of the Union's structures without one clear master plan. Some, such as Tom Reed of The Washington Post, said of the Union, "Nobody would have deliberately designed a government as complex and as redundant as the EU. Even the Parliament's 2 seats, which have switched several times, are a result of various agreements or lack of agreements." Although most MEPs would prefer to be based just in Brussels, at John Major's 1992 Edinburgh summit, France engineered a treaty amendment to maintain Parliament's plenary seat permanently at Strasbourg. Consultative Assembly. The body was not mentioned in the original Schuman Declaration. It was assumed or hoped that difficulties with the British would be resolved to allow the Council of Europe's Assembly to perform the task. A separate assembly was introduced during negotiations on the treaty as an institution which would counterbalance and monitor the executive while providing democratic legitimacy. The wording of the ECSC treaty demonstrated the leaders' desire for more than a normal consultative assembly by using the term representatives of the people and allowed for direct election. Its early importance was highlighted when the assembly was given the task of drawing up the draft treaty to establish a European political community. In this, the ad hoc assembly was established on the 13th of September 1952 with extra members, but after the failure of the proposed European Defence Community, the project was dropped. Despite this, the European Economic Community and Euratom were established in 1958 by the Treaties of Rome. The Common Assembly was shared by all three communities and it renamed itself the European Parliamentary Assembly. The first meeting was held on the 19th of March 1958, having been set up in Luxembourg. It elected Schuman as its president, and on the 13th of May it rearranged itself to sit according to political ideology rather than nationality. This is seen as the birth of the modern European Parliament, with Parliament's 50 years celebrations being held in March 2008 rather than 2002. The three communities merged the remaining organs as the European Communities in 1967, and the body was renamed to the current European Parliament in 1962. In 1970, the Parliament was granted power over areas of the Community's budget, which were expanded to the whole budget in 1975. Under the Rome Treaties, the Parliament should have become elected. However, the Council was required to agree a uniform voting system beforehand, which it failed to do. The Parliament threatened to take the Council to the European Court of Justice, leading to a compromise whereby the Council would agree to elections, but the issue of voting systems would be put off till a later date. Elected Parliament in 1979, its members were directly elected for the first time. This sets it apart from similar institutions such as those of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, a Pan-African Parliament, which are appointed. After that first election, the Parliament held its first session on the 11th of July 1979, electing Simone Veil MEP as its president. Veil was also the first female president of the Parliament since it was formed as the Common Assembly. As an elected body, the Parliament began to draft proposals addressing the functioning of the EU. For example, in 1984, inspired by its previous work on the political community, it drafted the draft treaty establishing the European Union. Although it was not adopted, many ideas were later implemented by other treaties. Furthermore, the Parliament began holding votes on proposed Commission presidents from the 1980s before it was given any formal right to veto. Since the election, the membership of the European Parliament has simply expanded whenever new nations have joined. Following this, the Treaty of Nice imposed a cap on the number of members to be elected, 732. Like the other institutions, the Parliament's seat was not yet fixed. The provisional arrangements placed Parliament in Strasbourg, while the Commission and Council had their seats in Brussels. In 1985, the Parliament, wishing to be closer to these institutions, built a second chamber in Brussels and moved some of its work there despite protests from some states. A final agreement was eventually reached by the European Council in 1992. It stated the Parliament would retain its formal seat in Strasbourg, where 12 sessions a year would be held, but with all other parliamentary activity in Brussels. This two-seat arrangement was contested by Parliament but was later enshrined in the Treaty of Amsterdam. To this day, the institution's locations are a source of contention. The Parliament gained more powers from successive treaties, namely through the extension of the ordinary legislative procedure, and in 1999, the Parliament forced the resignation of the Santa Commission. The Parliament had refused to approve the community budget over allegations of fraud and mismanagement in the Commission. The two main parties took on a government opposition dynamic for the first time during the crisis, which ended in the Commission resigning en masse, the first of any forced resignation, in the face of an impending censure pressure from the Parliament. Barroso I in 2004, following the largest transnational election in history. Despite the European Council choosing a president from the largest political group, the Parliament again exerted pressure on the Commission. During the Parliament's hearings of the proposed commissioners, MEPs raised doubts about some nominees, with the Civil Liberties Committee rejecting Rocco Buttiglione from the post of Commissioner for Justice, Freedom and Security over his views on homosexuality. That was the first time the Parliament had ever voted against an incoming commissioner, and despite Barroso's insistence upon Buttiglione, the Parliament forced Buttiglione to be withdrawn. A number of other commissioners also had to be withdrawn or reassigned before Parliament allowed the Barroso Commission to take office. Along with the extension of the ordinary legislative procedure, the Parliament's democratic mandate has given it greater control over legislation against the other institutions. In voting on the Bolkestein Directive in 2006, the Parliament voted by a large majority for over 400 amendments that changed the fundamental principle of the law. The Financial Times described it in the following terms: "That is where the European Parliament has suddenly come into its own. It marks another shift in power between the three central EU institutions." Last week's vote suggests that the directly elected MEPs, in spite of the multitude of ideological, national and historical allegiances, have started to coalesce as a serious and effective EU institution. Just as enlargement has greatly complicated negotiations inside both the Council and Commission. In 2007, for the first time, Justice Commissioner Franco Frattini included Parliament in talks on the second Schengen information system, even though MEPs only needed to be consulted on parts of the package. After that experiment, Frattini indicated he would like to include Parliament in all justice and criminal matters, informally preempting the new powers they could gain as part of the Treaty of Lisbon. Between 2007 and 2009, a special working group on parliamentary reform implemented a series of changes to modernize the institution, such as more speaking time for rapporteurs, increased committee cooperation and other efficiency reforms. Recent history: the Lisbon Treaty finally came into force on the 1st of December 2009, granting Parliament powers over the entire EU budget, making Parliament's legislative powers equal to the Council's in nearly all areas, and linking the appointment of the Commission President to Parliament's own elections. Despite some calls for the parties to put forward candidates beforehand, only the EPP had won in re-endorsing Barroso. Barroso gained the support of the European Council for a second term and secured majority support from the Parliament in September 2009. Parliament voted 382 votes in favour and 219 votes against, with support of the European People's Party, European Conservatives and Reformists, and the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. The Liberals gave support after Barroso gave them a number of concessions. The Liberals previously joined the Socialists' call for a delayed vote. Once Barroso put forward the candidates for his next commission, another opportunity to gain concessions arose. Bulgarian nominee Rumiana Geleva was forced to step down by Parliament due to concerns over her experience and financial interests. She only had the support of the EPP, which began to retaliate on left-wing candidates before Geleva gave in and was replaced. Before the final vote, Parliament demanded a number of concessions as part of a future working agreement under the new Lisbon Treaty. The deal includes that Parliament's President will attend high-level Commission meetings. Parliament will have a seat in the EU's Commission, lead international negotiations, and have a right to information on agreements. However, Parliament secured only an observer seat. Parliament also did not secure a say over the appointment of delegation heads and special representatives for foreign policy, although they will appear before Parliament after they have been appointed by the High Representative. One major internal power was that Parliament wanted a pledge from the Commission that it would put forward legislation when Parliament requests. Barroso considered this an infringement on the Commission's powers but did agree to respond within 3 months. Most requests are already responded to positively. During the setting up of the European External Action Service, Parliament used its control over the EU budget to influence the shape of the EEAS. MEPs had aimed at getting greater oversight over the EEAS by linking it to the Commission and having political deputies to the High Representative. MEPs didn't manage to get everything they demanded. However, they got broader financial control over the new body. Powers and functions. The Parliament and Council have been compared to the two chambers of a bicameral legislature. However, there are some differences from national legislatures. For example, neither the Parliament nor the Council have the power of legislative initiative. In community matters, this is a power uniquely reserved for the European Commission. Therefore, while Parliament can amend and reject legislation to make a proposal for legislation, it needs the Commission to draft a bill before anything can become law. The value of such a power has been questioned by noting that in the national legislatures of the member states 85% of initiatives introduced without executive support fail to become law. Yet it has been argued by former Parliament President Hans-Gert Pöttering that the Parliament does have the right to ask the Commission to draft such legislation, and as the Commission is following Parliament's proposals more and more, Parliament does have a de facto right of legislative initiative. The Parliament also has a great deal of indirect influence through non-binding resolutions and committee hearings. As a pan-European soapbox with the ear of thousands of Brussels-based journalists, there is also an indirect effect on foreign policy. The Parliament must approve all development grants, including those overseas. For example, the support for post-war Iraq reconstruction or incentives for the cessation of Iranian nuclear development must be supported by the Parliament. Parliamentary support was also required for the transatlantic passenger data sharing deal with the United States. Finally, Parliament holds a non-binding vote on new EU treaties but cannot veto it. However, when Parliament threatened to vote down the Nice Treaty, the Belgian and Italian parliaments said they would veto the treaty on the European Parliament's behalf. Legislative procedure. With each new treaty, the powers of the Parliament, in terms of its role in the Union's legislative procedures, have expanded. The procedure which has slowly become dominant is the ordinary legislative procedure, which provides an equal footing between Parliament and Council. In particular, under the procedure, the Commission presents a proposal to Parliament and the Council which can only become law if both agree on a text, which they do through successive readings up to a maximum of 3. In its first reading, Parliament may send amendments to the Council which can either adopt the text with those amendments or send back a common position. The position may either be approved by Parliament, or it may reject the text by an absolute majority, causing it to fail, or it may adopt further amendments also by an absolute majority. If the Council does not approve these, then a conciliation committee is formed. The committee is composed of the Council members plus an equal number of MEPs who seek to agree a compromise. Once a position is agreed, it has to be approved by Parliament by a simple majority. This is also aided by Parliament's mandate as the only directly democratic institution, which has given it leeway to have greater control over legislation than other institutions. For example, over its changes to the Bolkestein 2009 directive in 2006. The few other areas that operate the special legislative procedures are justice and home affairs, budget and taxation, and certain aspects of other policy areas, such as the fiscal aspects of environmental policy. In these areas, the Council and Parliament decide law alone. The procedure also depends upon which type of institutional act is being used. The strongest act is a regulation, an act or law which is directly applicable in its entirety. Then there are directives which bind member states to certain goals which they must achieve. They do this through their own laws and hence have room to maneuver in deciding upon them. A decision is an instrument which is focused at a particular person group and is directly applicable. Institutions may also issue recommendations and opinions which are merely non-binding declarations. There is a further document which does not follow normal procedures. This is a written declaration, which is similar to an early-day motion used in the Westminster system. It is a document proposed by up to 5 MEPs on a matter within the EU's activities used to launch a debate on that subject. Having been posted outside the entrance to the hemicycle, members can sign the declaration, and if a majority does so, it is forwarded to the President and announced to the plenary before being forwarded to the other institutions and formally noted in the minutes. Budget. The legislative branch officially holds the Union's budgetary authority with powers gained through the budgetary treaties of the 1970s and the Lisbon Treaty. The EU budget is subject to a form of the ordinary legislative procedure with a single reading, giving Parliament power over the entire budget on an equal footing to the Council. If there is a disagreement between them, it is taken to a conciliation committee, as it is for legislative proposals. If the joint conciliation text is not approved, the Parliament may adopt the budget definitively. The Parliament is also responsible for discharging the implementation of previous budgets based on the annual report of the European Court of Auditors. It has refused to approve the budget only twice, in 1984 and in 1998. On the latter occasion, it led to the resignation of the Santer Commission, highlighting how the budgetary power gives Parliament a great deal of power over the Commission. Parliament also makes extensive use of its budgetary and other powers elsewhere, for example in the setting up of the European External Action Service. Parliament has a de facto veto over its design, as it has to approve the budgetary and staff changes. Control of the executive. Unlike most EU states, which usually operate parliamentary systems, there is a separation of powers between the executive and legislative, which makes the European Parliament more akin to the United States Congress than an EU state legislature. The President of the European Commission is proposed by the European Council on the basis of the European elections to Parliament. The proposal has to be approved by the Parliament to elect the President according to the treaties. Following the approval of the Commission President, the members of the Commission are proposed by the President in accord with the member states. Each Commissioner comes before a relevant parliamentary committee hearing covering the proposed portfolio. They are then, as a body, approved or rejected by the Parliament. In practice, the Parliament has never voted against a President to his Commission, but it did seem likely when the Barroso Commission was put forward. The resulting pressure forced the proposal to be withdrawn and changed to be more acceptable to Parliament. That pressure was seen as an important sign by some of the evolving nature of the Parliament and its ability to make the Commission accountable, rather than being a rubber stamp for candidates. Furthermore, in voting on the Commission, MEPs also voted along party lines, rather than national lines. Despite frequent pressure from national governments on their MEPs, this cohesion and willingness to use the Parliament's power ensured greater attention from national leaders, other institutions and the public, who previously gave the lowest ever turnout for the Parliament's election. institutions. The Parliament also has the power to censure the Commission if they have a two-thirds majority, which will force the resignation of the entire Commission from office. As with approval, this power has never been used, but it was threatened to the Santa Commission, who subsequently resigned of their own accord. There are a few other controls, such as the requirement of Commission to submit reports to the Parliament and answer questions from MEPs, the requirement of the President in office of the Council to present its programme at the start of the presidency, the obligation on the President of the European Council to report to Parliament after each of its meetings, the right of MEPs to make requests for legislation and policy to the Commission, and the right to question members of those institutions. At present, MEPs may ask a question on any topic whatsoever, but in July 2008 MEPs voted to limit questions to those within the EU's mandate and ban offensive or personal questions. Supervisory powers. The Parliament also has other powers of general supervision, mainly granted by the Maastricht Treaty. The Parliament has the power to set up a committee of inquiry, for example over mad cow disease or CIA detention flights. The former led to the creation of the European Veterinary Agency. The Parliament can call other institutions to answer questions and, if necessary, to take them to court if they break EU law or treaties. Furthermore, it has powers over the appointment of the members of the Court of Auditors and the President and Executive Board of the European Central Bank. The ECB President is also obliged to present an annual report to the Parliament. The European Ombudsman is elected by the Parliament, who deals with public complaints against all institutions. Petitions can also be brought forward by any EU citizen on a matter within the EU's sphere of activities. The Committee on Petitions hears cases, some 1,500 each year, sometimes presented by the citizen themselves at the Parliament. While the Parliament attempts to resolve the issue as a mediator, they do resort to legal proceedings if it is necessary to resolve the citizens' dispute.